hands where I can see them, or you'll end up a head shorter, and neither of us want that. The man on the wagon heard a voice call from the fallen tree ahead. Yet, no matter how hard he looked, he could see nothing but leaves fluttering in the wind, casting dancing shadows across the sandy ground. Hey, hands where I can see them, I said. The voice rang out again. The man on the wagon slowly rose to his feet, keeping a cautious eye on the tree. With a rusty squeal, he drew a battered sword. First of all, you look 80 years old. And second, the sword looks like it could crumble into dust all by itself at any moment. So, let's save us both the trouble. Throw that pile of rust away and put your hands up. The man bared his teeth. I'm not taking orders from some coward hiding in the bushes. Come out and show yourself, coward! A groan sounded directly behind the wagon driver. Startled, he spun around and found himself staring at a sword pummel rushing towards his face. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the wide, mischievous grin of a young man kneeling on the top of the wagon behind him. You should have listened to me. Then tomorrow you'd be traveling without a giant bump on your head. Now let's see what treasures you've got in here. He lightly jumped down from the wagon. Brown sand swirled around his legs. Just as he reached for the wagon door, he heard the sound of approaching hooves. He spun around in search of a hiding place, but the first rider had already appeared. A man in armor sat atop the horse, and a deep voice echoed from beneath his iron helmet. Halt! Don't move, you filthy thief! The man by the wagon turned toward the rider, sword still in hand. Give me 2 more minutes. Once I've emptied everything inside, I'll be over the hills and gone. As if, in the Queen's name, I hereby place you under arrest for theft. The armored man jumped heavily from his horse and landed beside it. What is wrong with everyone today? Everybody just wants trouble, the man by the wagon muttered. But fine, we'll do it the hard way. He skillfully spun his sword in one hand. Without another word, the armored man charged. Just before reaching him, his foot stepped into a shadow on the ground. But instead of finding solid earth beneath him, his feet simply sank into the darkness. Within seconds, the armored man had vanished completely. What have you done to Captain Shishik? A second armored rider approached on a white horse. Beside him rode a young man in a black robe. The young mage shouted, Look out! Can't you see? He doesn't have a shadow. He must be one of these Dark Order sorcerers. I left the organization a long time ago, the man replied casually, crossing his arms as he leaned against the wagon. I'm a completely different person now, an honest citizen earning his living through honest work. Honest? You're stealing other people's property, the armored rider shouted as he urged his horse forward. I'm providing job security for people like you. I just happen to charge a small fee for my services. A black shadow shot across the ground. It looked exactly like the shadowless man. The shadow grabbed hold of the rider's shadow. Suddenly, as though he had ridden straight into a stone wall, the rider was ripped from his saddle while the confused horse continued galloping forward. A fireball suddenly flew through the air and struck the shadowless man square on the chest. But instead of falling, his body unraveled into black strand that melted into the ground. A moment later, he appeared beside the armored soldier, who was just beginning to rise. With one hand, he tore the helmet from the man's head. With the other, he delivered a precise strike to the temple, knocking him unconscious. Now it's just you. As he spoke, his body dissolved once more. Only his shadow remained behind. Yet the man himself was nowhere to be seen. What kind of magic is this? The young mage shouted nervously. He spread his fingers and hurled another fireball towards the spot where the man had just stood. When the cloud of sand finally settled, the shadow was still there, and it seemed to be grinning at him. Then the shadow suddenly darted forward. The young mage dug his heels into the horse flanks. The animal whined and reared up, but it didn't move an inch. Confused and increasingly panicked, the man looked around and saw another shadow of the man somehow gripping the horse's shadow as though that alone was enough to hold the beast in place. The young mage immediately leapt from the saddle, But while airborne, he realized with growing horror that the charging shadow has already reached the ground beneath him. The shadow was still smiling. A hole opened in its center. Beyond it lay a world of endless darkness, filled with red eyes staring back at him. With a fading scream, the young mage fell into the opening. The hole instantly closed behind him. The two shadows raced towards the wagon and slipped through a narrow crack beneath the door. A moment later, a loud crashing and rattling came from inside. Then, the wagon door flew through the air and slammed into a nearby tree. The formerly shadowless man jumped out of the wagon, carrying a sack over his shoulder, gold chains dangling from the opening. Humming cheerfully to himself, he disappeared into the forest. Looking at him as he walked away, you would never suspect a thing sinister. Only if you watched a little longer and noticed the shadow smiling at you, you would realize it was time to run.